He fired me for being right. That's the part that should bother me most. The injustice of it. The casual cruelty of a man who mistakes competence for insubordination. But what actually keeps me awake at night, what makes my heart rate steady into something colder than calm, is simpler than that. He's about to realize I'm the only one who could have saved him. And I'm going to let him burn anyway. The hotel suite smelled like money in its most distilled form. Not the aggressive new money scent of Vance Global's executive floor. That deliberate combination of Tom Ford cologne and single-origin espresso that announced itself 3 seconds before the man wearing it entered the room. This was different. Older, more certain of itself. The Peninsula Hotel on Fifth Avenue had spent the last 119 years perfecting this particular olfactory signature, and the result was a scent that didn't announce wealth so much as assume it. Beeswax polish on wood that predated the Great Depression. White orchids replaced twice daily by staff you never saw. Egyptian cotton with a thread count so high it stopped being a number and became a philosophy. I'd checked in at 11:34 p.m. the previous night, Saturday night bleeding into Sunday morning. The kind of hour when Manhattan's architecture looks like a stage set, and you can almost believe the whole city is performing just for you. The lobby had been empty except for the night staff. 2 people at the front desk who'd greeted me with the kind of warmth that comes from being paid very well to make strangers feel like returning family. One of them had checked me in, while the other had somehow materialized my room key and a bottle of Pellegrino I hadn't requested, but apparently needed. "Miss Chen," the first one had said, not reading it off a screen, but knowing it the way you know things that have been emphasized in pre-shift briefings. "Welcome to the Peninsula," Patricia Ward called ahead. "We have you in our Grand Terrace suite with an open-ended reservation. Christopher will show you to your room." Christopher had been 60-something, wearing a uniform that probably cost more than my former monthly salary, and he'd carried my single duffel bag, everything I'd grabbed from my Astoria apartment before I couldn't stand to be there anymore, like it weighed nothing and mattered everything. The Grand Terrace suite was 1,200 square feet of what old money looked like when it stopped pretending to be humble. Herringbone floors in a wood I couldn't name but could feel was expensive. Crown molding that had been installed by craftsmen who'd probably died before my mother was born. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Fifth Avenue, where the city performed its eternal light show for an audience of insomniacs and people who'd recently discovered they were worth more than they'd ever imagined. I'd stood at those windows for 1 hour and 17 minutes last night, just standing, just watching. Just letting my nervous system recalibrate from woman who can't afford eggs to woman who owns 40% of a Fortune 500 company. The recalibration was ongoing. Now it was 7:43 a.m. on Monday morning, and the armor was laid out on the bed like surgical instruments before an operation. The Armani suit came first. I'd left it on the bed deliberately, spread out so I could see the whole thing at once. Black wool. Not the cheap black that fades to charcoal after 3 dry cleanings, but the kind of black that Italian mills spend generations perfecting. A black that absorbed light without reflecting it. A black that said authority in a frequency only other people with power could hear. The fabric had a texture to it, subtle. You had to be close to see it. A microweave that caught light at certain angles and turned it into shadow at others. The kind of detail that cost an extra $800 and made the difference between expensive suit and suit that announces you're not trying to look expensive. I picked up the jacket first, held it by the shoulders, felt the weight of it. 16 ounces of virgin wool, approximately $4,200 of construction, design, and the cumulative knowledge of a fashion house that had been dressing powerful people since 1975. But what I was really holding was transformation. Clothes are a language. I'd learned this at Columbia Law before I'd had to drop out, had learned it again at Vance Global, watching the partners and senior associates, noticing who got promoted and who didn't, tracking the correlation between what people wore and how seriously they were taken. The language has grammar, has syntax, has rules that are never written down but always enforced. Cheap suits say, "I'm trying." Expensive suits say, "I've arrived." Exceptional suits say, I don't need to announce myself, you already know who I am. This suit was exceptional. I set the jacket down and moved to the blouse. White silk, Brunello Cucinelli. The associate at Bergdorf's had explained it was 22 mame silk, a measurement of density I hadn't known existed until 3 days ago. Now I understood it was another form of mathematics, the calculus of luxury expressed in grams per square meter. I picked up the blouse and held it to the light. The silk was so fine I could see my hand through it, translucent without being transparent. The kind of fabric that required careful engineering, silk this fine would tear easily if not woven correctly, would lose its structure if not cut precisely. The fabric smelled like nothing, which was itself a smell. The absence of the chemical treatments that make cheaper silks stiff or shiny or easy to care for. This silk had been left alone to be exactly what it was: delicate, expensive, and utterly impractical for anyone who had to worry about dry cleaning bills. I wasn't worried about dry cleaning bills anymore. I carried the blouse to the bathroom, all marble and brass fixtures that looked like they'd been installed when Eisenhower was president, and hung it on the back of the door while I showered. The shower had 7 different settings and water pressure that felt like a professional massage. I stood under it for 23 minutes, letting water that was exactly 102 degrees Fahrenheit. There was a digital display, run over my shoulders and down my back, and wash away the last physical traces of Astoria and poverty and being declined for $12 worth of groceries. When I stepped out, the bathroom mirror had fogged completely. I wiped it clear with one of the towels, Egyptian cotton naturally, the kind that weighed 3 pounds and felt like being dried off by a cloud, and looked at myself. Same face, same body, same scar on my left knee from falling off a bike when I was 9. Same slight asymmetry in my eyebrows that I'd stopped trying to fix with tweezers because it never worked. But something in the expression was different. Harder, more focused. The expression of someone who'd performed calculus in a grocery store and come out the other side, understanding that poverty was just math and math could be solved. I dried my hair, put on the undergarments I'd bought, La Perla, because apparently even underwear had hierarchies I was now expected to understand. The bra fit perfectly because I'd been professionally measured. The silk against my skin felt like water, like wearing nothing, like wearing something so expensive it transcended function and became philosophy. Then I put on the blouse. The silk slid over my shoulders like it had been designed specifically for my body, which, in a sense, it had. The tailoring at Bergdorf's had included minor alterations, taking in the waist by ½ an inch, adjusting the sleeve length so the cuff hit exactly at my wrist bone. The blouse buttoned with mother-of-pearl closures. Each button fit through its corresponding buttonhole with perfect resistance. Not too tight, that would suggest poor construction. Not too loose, that would suggest the fabric was already stretching. Just right. The Goldilocks zone of haute couture. I tucked the blouse into the suit trousers. Wool with a silk lining, Bemberg, the associate had called it, explaining that it allowed the fabric to move better, to breathe, to drape in ways that unlined trousers couldn't achieve. I'd nodded along, absorbing information about clothes the way I used to absorb information about merger agreements and SEC filings, learning a new language, understanding that in the world I was entering, these details mattered. Not because anyone would necessarily notice them, but because you would know, and knowing changed how you moved. The trousers fit like they'd been painted on. Not tight, that would be vulgar, but precise, following the line of my leg from hip to ankle with exactly 0 excess fabric. The hem broke at the top of my foot at exactly the right place, which I knew because the tailor had spent 15 minutes with pins getting it perfect. I pulled on the jacket and felt everything change. Weight settled across my shoulders. Not heavy, the construction was too good for that, but present, substantial. The kind of weight that made you stand straighter without thinking about it, that made your spine lengthen and your shoulders pull back in a posture that announced confidence whether you felt it or not. The jacket's lining, more silk naturally, slid against the blouse without friction. The sleeves were exactly the right length, ending at my wrist bone so that a 1/4 inch of white cuff showed when my arms hung at my sides. The silhouette was architectural, clean lines, sharp angles. the kind of construction that required pattern-making expertise and an understanding of how fabric interacted with the female form. I walked to the full-length mirror in the bedroom. The woman looking back had my face, but not my history. She looked like someone who'd never counted pennies, someone who'd never been fired, someone who'd never stood in a discount grocery store doing mental arithmetic and coming up 60 cents short. She looked like someone who owned things, important things like 40% of Vance Global Incorporated. I studied the reflection with the same analytical precision I used to study legal contracts, looking for flaws, for anything that didn't align, for any detail that might undermine the message the suit was broadcasting. The fit was perfect. The proportions were perfect. The color, that deep, light-absorbing black, made my dark hair look deliberate instead of ordinary, made my skin look porcelain instead of pale. But something was missing. I walked back to the bed where the rest of the armor waited. The Louboutins, I'd saved them for last deliberately. Shoes were the foundation, literally and metaphorically. Everything else could be perfect, but if the shoes were wrong, the entire message collapsed. These were not wrong. Black patent leather, 4-inch heel, the red sole visible only in motion, a flash of signature color that had become visual shorthand for a particular kind of female power. The kind that didn't apologize for existing, the kind that took up space deliberately and dared anyone to question it. I picked up the right shoe first. The patent leather felt cool and smooth under my fingers, inflexible. Unlike the supple leather of casual shoes, patent was rigid. It didn't mold to your foot over time. It required your foot to adapt to it, which was part of the point. I slipped my foot inside. The interior was lined with leather so soft it felt like skin. The shoe fit perfectly. I'd been measured, had tried on 7 different sizes and widths before finding the exact right combination. A 4-inch heel changed everything about how you stood, how you walked, how you distributed your weight. It changed your center of gravity, made you taller, yes, but also made you slower, more deliberate. Every step required micro-calculations of balance and weight distribution. You couldn't run in 4-inch heels, couldn't sprint away if something went wrong, but you also couldn't hide. I put on the second shoe, stood, took 3 experimental steps across the herringbone floor. The sound was exactly what I'd wanted, that sharp, decisive click of heel against hardwood. The percussion of purpose, the announcement of arrival. Click, click, click. Not the quiet shuffle of flats or sneakers, not the muffled thud of wedges or platforms. This was a sound that carried, that announced your presence 3 seconds before you entered a room, that made people look up from their phones and their computers and their conversations, that made people pay attention. I walked to the windows and looked out at Fifth Avenue, Monday morning in Manhattan. The sidewalks were already crowded. People in various states of professional dress heading to their various offices to perform their various functions in the vast machinery of corporate capitalism. Most of them were worried about performance reviews, about whether their boss liked them, about whether they'd get promoted or passed over, about whether they could afford their rent and their student loans and the particular lifestyle they'd convinced themselves they needed to maintain. I used to be one of them. 72 hours ago, I'd been standing in a discount grocery store doing mental arithmetic, trying to make $12 cover bread and peanut butter and eggs and coming up short. Now I was standing in a $2,000 per night hotel suite, wearing $8,000 worth of clothes and shoes, about to walk into a Fortune 500 company's board meeting and announce that I owned 40% of it. The cognitive dissonance was extraordinary. I'd spent the last 3 days trying to process it, trying to make the numbers feel real. $4 million in liquid assets, real estate holdings in 3 countries, a stock portfolio worth 8 figures, a villa in Tuscany I'd never seen, and 40% of Vance Global, worth approximately $340 million at current valuation. $340 million. I'd been fired for saving a $340 million merger. Now I owned $340 million worth of the company that had fired me. The mathematics of revenge were elegant. I turned away from the window and checked the time, 8:04 a.m. The board meeting started at 9. I needed to arrive at 8:47, late enough that everyone would already be there, early enough that I could make an entrance before the meeting officially started. 43 minutes. I walked to the console table where I'd laid out the final pieces. The briefcase, Valextra, Italian, burgundy leather that would age beautifully and cost more than I used to make in a month. The watch, Cartier tank, vintage, white gold, simple Roman numerals, the kind of watch that whispered instead of shouted. The trench coat, Burberry, honey-colored gabardine, the classic design that had been essentially unchanged since 1912 because when something's perfect you don't fix it. I put on the watch first. The weight was substantial but not heavy. The face was small, 33 millimeters, deliberately unfashionable in an era of oversized watches, which made it perfect. The kind of watch that suggested you didn't need to announce the time, that you had people for that. No other jewelry, no necklace, no bracelet, no rings, nothing that could be interpreted as decoration or distraction, nothing that suggested I was trying to soften the message the suit was broadcasting. I picked up the briefcase and checked its contents one final time. The portfolio from Daniel containing proof of my 40% position. A leather notebook, Smithson, naturally, with notes I'd made about Vance Global's current strategic position. 2 Mont Blanc pens. My phone, and a USB drive containing information about Gregory Vance's death. Information Julian definitely didn't know I had. Information that would be useful if things went badly in the boardroom. Insurance. I closed the briefcase and picked up the trench coat. The gabardine felt substantial in my hands, tightly woven, water-resistant without being waterproof. The kind of fabric that required 120 years of institutional knowledge to produce correctly. I put it on. The lining was the signature Burberry check, tan and black and red and white in the pattern that had become one of the most recognizable designs in fashion. A flash of heritage visible only when I moved, one final check in the full-length mirror. The woman in the reflection looked like she belonged in boardrooms, looked like she made decisions that affected thousands of people, looked like someone Julian Vance would have to take seriously, looked like someone who owned 40% of his company and was about to make him understand exactly what that meant. I picked up my phone, checked for messages. There was one from Daniel, sent at 7:52 a.m., board meeting confirmed for 9 a.m. All documentation is in order. Your rights as a 5% shareholder are absolute and cannot be contested. Remember, you belong there. DW, I typed back, understood. Departing hotel now. His response came immediately, good luck, though I suspect you won't need it. I put the phone in my briefcase and walked to the door, paused with my hand on the handle, took one breath, 2, let my heart rate settle into something steady and cold. This was the point of no return. Once I walked out this door, once I got in the car Patricia had arranged, once I walked into that building and announced my presence, there would be no going back to anonymity. No pretending this was a misunderstanding. No returning to the version of myself who'd counted pennies and gotten fired, and accepted it as just another piece of evidence that the world was fundamentally unfair. I was about to declare war on a man who'd spent his entire life winning. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The carpet absorbed the sound of my Louboutins, turning the sharp click into a muffled whisper. The hallway was empty. 8:17 a.m. on a Monday morning, most guests either already gone or still sleeping off whatever they'd done Sunday night. The elevator arrived within 15 seconds. The interior was mirrored brass and soft lighting designed to make everyone look 10 years younger and infinitely more sophisticated. I watched my reflection descend 38 floors, watched the numbers count down, watched the woman in the armor prepare for what came next. The lobby was quietly active, business travelers checking out, staff moving with purpose, the breakfast restaurant visible through glass doors where people who could afford $85 Eggs Benedict were having $85 Eggs Benedict. The car was waiting in the circular drive exactly where Patricia had said it would be. Black Mercedes S-Class. Driver in a dark suit standing by the rear door. Miss Chen, he said as I approached. Not a question, a statement. He knew who I was because someone had told him and he'd been paid to remember. Good morning. He opened the door. I slid into the back seat. The interior smelled like leather and expensive air filtration. Classical music played at a volume just above subliminal. Vivaldi, I thought, though I'd never been good at identifying composers. 590 Madison Avenue, I said, though he almost certainly already knew. Yes, ma'am. Approximately 12 minutes given current traffic. The car pulled into Fifth Avenue traffic with the kind of smooth acceleration that suggested German engineering and a price tag with too many zeros. I watched the city slide past the tinted windows, watched the pedestrians and the delivery trucks and the taxis and the buses, watched all those people living their regular Monday morning lives, completely unaware that in approximately 54 minutes, I was going to walk into a boardroom and detonate a bomb under Julian Vance's carefully constructed reality. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia. Daniel asked me to confirm the board meeting logistics. Vance Global board meetings are held in Conference Room A on the 42nd floor. Doors open at 8:45 a.m. Security has not been notified of your attendance. Daniel thought it best to maintain the element of surprise. If you encounter resistance, reference Section 4.3 of the corporate bylaws. You have absolute right of attendance as a 5% shareholder." I typed back. "Understood. Thank you." Another message appeared. One more thing. The board roster. Julian Vance, CEO, 51% through Family Trust. Thomas Wright, CFO. Margaret Strategy. David Chen, General Counsel. Plus 4 institutional investor representatives. All are Julian's people. None know you're coming. P7 against 1. The mathematics were daunting until you remembered that I held 40% and they collectively held 9%. And Julian's 51% majority was only absolute if everyone else remained passive and fragmented. I wasn't going to be passive. The Mercedes turned onto Madison Avenue and the Vance Global building came into view. 42 floors of glass and steel, the logo near the top, brushed metal letters, each taller than a person, caught the morning sun and reflected it like a challenge. I'd looked at this building 5 days a week for 3 years. Had walked through its revolving doors at 7:47 a.m. every morning. Had swiped my key card and taken the elevator to the 42nd floor and sat at my desk and performed my function as Julian Vance's assistant with the kind of competence that should have made me indispensable. Should have. The car pulled to the curb at 8:44 a.m. 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Exactly what I'd wanted. The driver came around and opened my door. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and heard the Louboutins make contact with concrete. That sharp, decisive click, the sound of arrival. "Will you need me to wait, Miss Chen?" "No," I said. "I'll be several hours." He nodded and pulled away, leaving me standing in front of the building where I'd been erased 8 days ago. 8 days. The span of time between being declined for $12 worth of groceries and owning $340 million worth of a Fortune 500 company. The span of time between being disposable and being indispensable. I adjusted my briefcase, straightened my shoulders, felt the weight of the Armani jacket settle into place, felt the armor doing its job. Then I walked toward the revolving doors and let them pull me inside. The revolving door spun and deposited me into the lobby of Vance Global with the same mechanical indifference it had shown me 1,000 times before. But everything else was different. The lobby was exactly as I remembered it. Polished Italian marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. The kind of marble that came from a specific quarry in Carrara that had been operating since the Roman Empire. The Vance Global logo stretched across the reception wall in brushed steel letters, each one 8 feet tall, each one positioned with the kind of precision that required laser measurements and structural engineers. The whole space was designed to communicate one simple message: money, power, and the absolute certainty that came from having both. I'd walked through this lobby every weekday for 3 years, always early, always at 7:47 a.m., beating the rush, beating Julian, beating everyone except the night cleaning crew who were usually finishing their shift when I arrived, always invisible. The lobby furniture, Barcelona chairs in black leather, low tables with architectural magazines no one read, a modernist sculpture that probably cost 6 figures and definitely meant nothing, existed as props in a stage set designed to impress visiting clients and intimidate job applicants. I'd sat in one of those chairs once. During my interview, 29 months ago, wearing a suit from Ann Taylor that I'd bought on sale and shoes from DSW that I'd convinced myself looked expensive if you didn't look too closely. waiting to be called up to HR. Nervous, hopeful, desperate in the way you're desperate when you have $60,000 in student loans and a mother with stage 4 cancer and a law degree you'd never finished. The woman who'd sat in that chair didn't exist anymore. Kelly was at the reception desk. Same Kelly who'd worked reception for the 4 years I'd been at Vance Global. Mid-30s, blonde hair always in the same professional bob. Nordstrom dresses that were nice enough for corporate reception work, but not so nice they suggested she was reaching above her station. She'd been friendly to me in the careful way reception workers are friendly to executive assistants. Cordial without being close, warm without being familiar. We existed in the same ecosystem, but different tiers of the corporate food chain. She looked up as I approached, and I watched her face perform a sequence of micro-expressions that would have been invisible if I hadn't been looking for them. First, automatic professional smile, the one they train into you during onboarding, the one that activates when anyone in business attire enters your field of vision. Second, recognition, the smile faltering slightly as her brain processed that the woman approaching was someone she knew, someone who shouldn't be here. Third, confusion, the cognitive dissonance of trying to reconcile the Elena she remembered, the assistant, the fired one, the woman who'd been escorted out by security 8 days ago, with the Elena walking toward her now in an Armani suit and Louboutins that together cost more than Kelly probably made in a month. Fourth, recalibration, her eyes doing a rapid assessment of the situation, trying to determine the appropriate response. Should she acknowledge me? Pretend not to recognize me? Call security? I didn't give her time to decide. "Good morning, Kelly," I said. My voice was pleasant, professional, the voice of someone who belonged here and knew it. I didn't stop walking. The Louboutins made their distinctive sound against the marble. Click, click, click. A rhythm that carried in the lobby's deliberate acoustics. The sound of purpose, the sound of someone who had somewhere to be and the authority to get there. "Elena?" Kelly's voice rose slightly at the end, turning my name into a question. Do you have an appointment? I don't see you in the... "I'm here for the board meeting," I said without slowing down. "Conference room A. I won't need to be announced." I was already past the reception desk, already heading toward the elevator bank. Behind me, I heard Kelly pick up her phone, heard her voice go from confused to urgent. "Security? This is reception. I need you to... There's someone. She says she's here for the board meeting, but she's not on the list, and I think..." The elevator bank was 20 feet away. 3 elevators serving 42 floors. During business hours, they were constantly in motion, ferrying people up and down in the efficient choreography of corporate vertical transportation. This early 8:46 a.m., they were less busy. The morning rush mostly over. The executives already at their desks. The support staff already supporting. I pressed the call button and watched the floor indicators above each elevator. One was at 42, one was at 28, one was at 7 and descending. The elevator at 7 reached the lobby first. The doors opened with their familiar hydraulic sigh, a sound I'd heard so many times it had become part of my circadian rhythm, a Pavlovian trigger that meant work is beginning. I stepped inside and the smell hit me immediately. Elevator smell. That specific combination of recycled air and cleaning products and the faint mechanical scent of motors and cables doing their constant work. Every elevator in every office building smelled basically the same, but this one I knew. Had memorized over 3 years of daily ascents. I pressed 42. The doors began to close. Miss Chen, please wait." Marcus appeared in the narrowing gap between the doors. Security. The same Marcus who'd escorted me out 8 days ago with my cardboard box and my destroyed dignity. Mid-50s. Former NYPD according to the break room gossip I'd overheard once. The kind of face that suggested he'd seen things that made corporate security work feel like a vacation. He'd been kind when he'd escorted me out. Not effusively kind. That would have been unprofessional. But kind in the small ways that mattered. Had carried my box for me even though that wasn't strictly necessary. Had pressed the elevator button so I didn't have to. Had said good luck when I'd exited the building, and his voice had suggested he'd meant it. Now he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite categorize. Not hostile, not friendly, evaluating. "I need you to step out of the elevator, please," he said. His voice was professionally neutral, but there was something underneath. Uncertainty, maybe. The tone of someone who'd been given instructions that didn't quite make sense given the available data. "On what grounds?" I asked. My hand moved to the door open button, holding it. Professional courtesy. I could have let the doors close on him, could have forced him to take the stairs or wait for another elevator. But that would have been petty, and petty was beneath what I was here to do. "You're not authorized to be in this building, ma'am. Your access was revoked when you were terminated." "My access as an employee was revoked," I said. "But I'm not here as an employee. I'm here as a shareholder, a major shareholder. And under Section 4.3 of the Vance Global corporate bylaws, any shareholder controlling more than 5% of voting shares has the absolute right to attend quarterly board meetings." I watched him process this, watched the slight narrowing of his eyes that meant his brain was working through the implications. "How much do you control?" he asked. 40%. The number landed like a physical object in the small elevator car. I could see it hit him. See the recalculation happening behind his eyes. 40% meant I wasn't some minor investor who could be dismissed or delayed. 40% meant I had more power than anyone in this building except Julian himself. 40% meant that if Marcus physically removed me from this elevator, he would be forcibly ejecting a major shareholder from a meeting she had legal right to attend, and the consequences of that would fall on him and everyone who'd authorized him to do it. "I need to verify this," he said. "By all means, call legal, call Thomas Wright, call Julian himself." I glanced at my watch, the Cartier, simple and elegant, showing 8:48 a.m. "But the board meeting starts in 12 minutes, and I intend to be in that room when it does, so I suggest you verify quickly." Marcus pulled out his radio, stepped back from the elevator, spoke in a low voice I couldn't quite hear but could easily interpret, asking for instructions, probably from someone in legal or HR or Julian's office, explaining the situation, waiting for someone to tell him what to do with a fired assistant who'd returned claiming to own 40% of the company. I let go of the door open button. The doors closed. The elevator began its ascent. I watched the floor numbers climb, 5, 10, 15, 20. My reflection in the polished brass interior looked calm, composed, the suit doing its job, the armor holding. But underneath, my heart was performing complex mathematics of its own. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. Adrenaline, anticipation, the physiological response to standing on a precipice and choosing to jump. This was the point of commitment. Once those doors opened on 42, once I stepped out onto the executive floor, there would be no retreating into anonymity, no claiming this was a misunderstanding, no going back to being invisible. I was about to announce myself as a major shareholder in a Fortune 500 company. I was about to walk into Julian Vance's carefully controlled boardroom and shatter his illusion of absolute power. The elevator continued its climb. 25, 30, 35, 40, 41, 42. The doors opened. The executive floor looked exactly the same and completely different. Same polished Italian marble extending from the elevator bank down the hallway. Same brushed steel Vance Global logo on the wall. Smaller than the lobby version, but still substantial. Still announcing itself with the confidence of a company that had never doubted its own importance. Same floor-to-ceiling windows along the exterior wall showing Manhattan spread out below like a model of itself. But I was seeing it through different eyes. As an employee, as Julian's assistant, I'd experienced this floor as a space I needed permission to occupy. Every surface, every chair, every square foot of marble had been territory that belonged to someone else. I'd moved through it carefully, aware that I was a guest who could be asked to leave at any moment. Now I was seeing it as an owner. 40% of this floor was mine. 40% of the marble under my feet. 40% of the steel in that logo. 40% of the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view they commanded, and the rent value that view represented. The mathematics of ownership changed everything. I stepped out of the elevator and let the doors close behind me with their familiar soft chime. The executive floor was quiet in the way expensive spaces are quiet. Not silent, but insulated. Sound-dampening materials in the ceiling tiles. Heavy doors designed to contain conversations. the ambient white noise of HVAC systems moving air in ways that prevented eavesdropping. My Louboutins broke that quiet. Click, click, click. Each step announcing my presence in a way that sneakers or flats never could. The sound carried down the marble hallway, bouncing off the windows, echoing in a space designed to make important people feel important. I was 20 feet down the hallway when I heard another elevator arrive behind me. Heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving quickly. Heard Marcus's voice saying something I couldn't quite make out. I didn't turn around, didn't slow down. Just kept walking toward the corner that would take me from the elevator bank to the main executive hallway, where Julian's office, where my old desk, where the boardroom waited. The boardroom was at the far end of the executive floor. I'd been there countless times as Julian's assistant, bringing him documents he'd forgotten, taking notes during presentations, existing in the background as a piece of useful furniture that could occasionally be addressed directly when needed. Now I was walking toward it as someone who had the right to sit at the table. The corner approached. I turned it, and the main executive hallway opened up in front of me. And there, 30 feet away, sitting at the desk that used to be mine, my replacement. She was young, 25, maybe 26. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was professional without being severe. Wearing a dress from Banana Republic or Ann Taylor, or one of those stores that sold clothes specifically designed for young professional women who needed to look expensive without spending expensively. I recognized that dress. Not the specific dress, but the category. The desperation of trying to project competence on a budget that didn't allow for actual competence projecting clothes. She was focused on her dual monitors, typing something with the kind of concentrated intensity that suggested she was still in the phase where she believed that working hard mattered more than working smart, where she thought that loyalty and competence would be rewarded instead of punished. I'd been her once, 29 months ago, sitting at that same desk, believing that if I just did my job well enough, if I just made myself indispensable enough, I would be valued. I'd been wrong. She looked up as I approached, and I watched her face go through the same sequence of micro-expressions that Kelly's had in the lobby. Automatic professional smile, recognition that I was someone she should recognize, confusion about the context, uncertainty about the correct response. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was polite but cautious, the voice of someone who'd been trained to be helpful, but had also been trained to guard access to the executive suite. "I'm here for the board meeting," I said. I didn't slow down, didn't stop to explain. Just kept walking past her desk, the way I'd walked past Kelly's reception desk, the way I'd walked past Marcus's attempt to stop me, the way I'd walked into this building with the full knowledge that I had every legal right to be here and the financial power to destroy anyone who tried to prevent me from exercising that right. "Wait, I don't see you on the calendar. Do you have an appointment with Mr. Vance?" "I don't need an appointment with Mr. Vance," I said over my shoulder. "I'm a shareholder, Elena Chen." I heard her chair scrape against the floor. Heard her stand up, heard the uncertainty in her voice sharpen into something closer to panic. "I'm sorry, but I really need to verify. The board meeting is restricted to... I need to call." Behind me, Marcus and 2 other security guards rounded the corner. I heard one of them say my name. Heard Marcus say something about letting legal handle it. Heard footsteps accelerating to catch up with me. I was 15 feet from the boardroom doors when Marcus caught up to me. "Miss Chen." He wasn't touching me. Smart, that would be assault, and he knew it, but he'd positioned himself in my path, forcing me to either stop or physically push past him. "I just spoke with David Chen in legal. He's confirmed your shareholder status and your right to attend the meeting." I stopped, looked at him, waited. "But," he continued, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost apologetic, "Mr. Vance has requested that I escort you to the boardroom personally, for security purposes." "Security purposes," I repeated. The phrase was absurd, and we both knew it. I was 130 pounds in a wool suit and 4-inch heels. The security risk I presented was approximately 0, unless you counted the risk to Julian's ego. But I also understood what was really happening. Julian had been informed that I was here, had been told about my 40% position, had confirmed it was real and legally binding. And now he was scrambling to control the situation in the only way he could, by making sure I entered the boardroom on his terms with his security escort in a way that suggested he still had authority over the situation. It was pathetic and strategic in equal measure. "Of course," I said. "Please, lead the way." Marcus nodded and turned toward the boardroom. The other two security guards fell in behind me, creating a formation that was technically an escort and functionally a show of force designed to make me look like a problem being managed. I let them do it. Because in approximately 45 seconds, when those boardroom doors opened and I walked inside, none of this theater would matter. The only thing that would matter was the 40% I owned and what I chose to do with it. We walked down the hallway together, Marcus in front, me in the middle, two guards behind, a procession, a performance. My old replacement was on the phone now, her voice urgent but muffled by distance and the hallway's acoustic dampening. Probably calling Julian directly. Probably giving him a final warning that the fired assistant had returned and was about to enter his boardroom flanked by security like some kind of corporate insurgent. The boardroom doors came into view. Mahogany. Double doors. Solid wood that probably weighed 100 pounds each. The kind of doors designed to make you feel the weight of what happened behind them. The kind of doors that separated the people who made decisions from the people who lived with the consequences of those decisions. I'd walked through those doors hundreds of times, always carrying something. Documents, coffee, a laptop, the physical props that justified my presence in a space I didn't belong. Today I was carrying a briefcase full of documents that proved I belonged more than anyone except Julian himself. Marcus reached the doors and paused, turned to look at me. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something underneath. Not quite sympathy, not quite respect, something closer to recognition. The look of someone who understood that he was about to witness something memorable. "Ready, Miss Chen?" he asked. I could hear voices on the other side of the doors. The board had already gathered. Julian was probably in mid-presentation, projecting quarterly performance, playing the role of visionary CEO, completely unaware that in approximately 10 seconds his entire morning was about to derail. I adjusted my briefcase, straightened my shoulders, felt the Armani jacket settle into place, felt the armor doing its job. "Ready," I said. Marcus reached for the door handle. The doors were heavy enough that opening them required actual force. Marcus pulled and they swung inward with the kind of smooth, silent motion that came from hinges that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The boardroom went silent. 7 faces turned toward the door. 7 expressions moving through the same sequence I'd seen on Kelly's face, on my replacement's face, on Marcus's face when he'd first seen me step out of the elevator. Recognition, confusion, shock. And at the head of the table, standing in front of a presentation screen showing quarterly revenue projections in charts and graphs designed to impress, Julian Vance. He was mid-sentence when the doors opened. Something about market penetration and strategic positioning and the kind of corporate jargon that meant everything and nothing depending on whether the numbers behind it were good. The words died in his throat. I'd forgotten how he looked when he was surprised. Had never actually seen it in 3 years of working for him, because Julian Vance wasn't the kind of man who allowed himself to be surprised. He anticipated. He prepared. He controlled the variables. I was a variable he hadn't anticipated. His expressions cycled through emotions faster than I could catalog them. Confusion first, then recognition, then anger starting to build before being suppressed under professional composure that was fraying at the edges. He was wearing Creed Aventus. I could smell it from the doorway. Still the cologne of men who thought they'd already won. The board members were all staring now. I recognized most of them from my time as Julian's assistant, had scheduled their meetings, prepared their materials, existed in their peripheral vision as a useful accessory to Julian's authority. Now they were seeing me for the first time. I stepped into the boardroom and let Marcus close the door behind me with a soft, expensive click. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 4, 5. Let them look. Let them process. Let them try to reconcile the assistant they remembered with the shareholder standing in front of them in an Armani suit and Louboutins that cost more than most of them had spent on their first car. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who belonged here and knew it. I'm here for the board meeting, as is my right under Section 4.3 of the corporate bylaws. Julian's hands gripped the edge of the presentation podium. His knuckles had gone white. "What the hell?" he said slowly. "Are you doing here?" "What the hell are you doing here?" Julian's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Not anger exactly, though that was there, building underneath like pressure in a fault line. This was something more primal, confusion mixed with the first sparks of fear. The vocal equivalent of watching the ground shift beneath your feet and not yet understanding the full geometry of the collapse. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence do its work. Let it stretch and deepen while I walked further into the boardroom with the measured pace of someone who had every right to be there. The Louboutins made their distinctive sound against the marble, click, click, a rhythm that seemed amplified in the acoustic architecture of the room. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered it from the hundreds of times I'd entered it, carrying documents or coffee or whatever prop justified my temporary presence. 40 feet long, 20 feet wide, floor-to-ceiling windows along the exterior wall offering a view of Manhattan that probably added 30% to the rent value of the entire floor. A conference table in dark walnut that seated 12 and cost approximately $80,000 according to the invoice I'd once processed. Herman Miller chairs upholstered in leather that smelled like money and decisions. But I was smelling something else now. Julian's Creed Aventus had filled the room, that sharp, woody scent with notes of pineapple and birch that he wore like a declaration of victory. The cologne had always arrived 6 seconds before he did, a warning system I'd learned to rely on during my 3 years as his assistant. It had meant, straighten your spine, close any personal tabs, arrange your face into competent invisibility. Now, it just smelled like overconfidence. Mixed with it, and this was new, this was mine, was the scent I'd put on this morning at the Peninsula. Chanel No. 5. Not the eau de toilette that college girls bought at Sephora. The parfum. The actual perfume in the Art Deco bottle that cost $400 for 30 milliliters and smelled like what Coco Chanel had meant it to smell like in 1921. Power, femininity, and the absolute refusal to apologize for either. The scents were colliding in the boardroom. His cologne, my perfume. 2 olfactory signatures competing for dominance in an enclosed space. It felt appropriate. I walked to the empty chair at the far end of the conference table, the chair positioned directly opposite Julian at the head. The chair that was technically for visitors or junior staff who needed to present but didn't merit permanent board placement. I didn't sit. Instead, I placed my briefcase on the table. The Valextra leather made a soft sound against the walnut. Expensive material meeting expensive material, a conversation in textures. The 7 board members were all staring. I gave myself 3 seconds to look at each of them, to see them actually seeing me for the first time. Thomas Wright sat 2 seats to Julian's right. CFO, 63 years old, gray hair cut in the style of men who'd stopped caring about fashion sometime in the Reagan administration. Wire-rimmed glasses, a face that looked like it had been assembled from spreadsheets and quarterly reports. He'd been with Vance Global since before Julian took over, had worked under Gregory Vance, Julian's father, back when the company was 1/10 its current size. Thomas was looking at me with the expression of someone trying to solve a math problem that didn't make sense. The equation was simple. Fired assistant plus 8 days equals what? Why was I here? Why was I wearing clothes that cost more than he probably spent on suits in a year? Why was Julian frozen at his presentation podium instead of having security remove me? Margaret Seo sat directly across from Thomas. Head of Corporate Strategy, 51, Korean American, Stanford MBA, the only woman who'd been on the board before I walked in. She'd worn that distinction like armor, the token woman, the diversity hire who'd had to work 3 times as hard to be taken half as seriously and had done it anyway, climbing to a position where her strategic recommendations carried actual weight. Margaret was looking at me with something more complex than confusion. Recognition, yes, but also calculation. The look of someone who understood that whatever was happening had implications for the power structure in this room and was already running scenarios about where she'd end up when the dust settled. David Chen sat next to Margaret. General Counsel, 47, no relation to me despite the shared surname. Princeton undergrad, Yale Law, the kind of attorney who'd turned corporate law into performance art. He'd been copied on every legally significant email I'd ever sent as Julian's assistant. Had occasionally praised my work with one-line emails that I'd treasured like gold stars from a teacher whose approval actually meant something. David was looking at me with the expression of an attorney who just realized he might not have all the relevant facts. His hand had moved to his phone, probably already pulling up something, probably the SEC filings Patricia had mentioned, probably trying to verify what his legal instincts were telling him might actually be true. The other 4 board members I knew less well. Institutional investor representatives, private equity partners, the usual collection of people who made money by sitting in rooms and voting on other people's proposals. They were all looking at me with variations of the same expression. Who is this woman, and why is she interrupting our Monday morning? I let them look, let them wonder, let the silence build until it became uncomfortable. Julian broke first. Security, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I need. Security won't be removing me, I said. My voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone stating facts that shouldn't need stating. I have every legal right to be here. Section 4.3 of the Vance Global corporate bylaws states that any shareholder controlling more than 5% of voting shares has the right to attend quarterly board meetings. You don't own 5% of this company, Julian said. But there was something in his voice now, a hairline crack in the certainty, the beginning of doubt. I own 40%, I said. The number landed in the boardroom like a physical object dropped from a great height. I watched it hit, watched the board members process it, watched the mathematics ripple through their expressions. 40%, more than any of them held individually, more than most of them held collectively. Second only to Julian's 51% family trust position, which meant the power structure they'd all been operating under, the structure that assumed Julian had absolute control, that his decisions were final, that his authority was unquestionable, had just been revealed as conditional on my cooperation. Thomas Wright spoke first. His voice had the careful neutrality of a CFO who just realized he might be sitting in a room with a major shareholder he hadn't known existed. Miss Chen. He was using my last name now. Professional courtesy. The respect you show to people who own large percentages of your company. I'm going to need you to clarify what you mean by 40%. I mean, I own 40% of Vance Global Incorporated, I said, through the Blackwood Family Trust, acquired between 2008 and 2015 when the company was still privately held under Gregory Vance's leadership, structured through shell companies and holding entities to obscure the beneficial owner's identity. At the mention of Gregory Vance, Julian's father, dead 7 years now under circumstances that were public record but not public knowledge, something flickered across Julian's face. Pain, maybe, or anger, or the particular combination of both that comes from family wounds that never properly healed. That's impossible, he said. But his voice had lost its conviction. He was saying it because he needed it to be true, not because he believed it was. It's very possible, I said, and easily verified. David. I looked directly at the General Counsel. You should have received an SEC filing notification approximately 72 hours ago regarding the transfer of the Blackwood position from Arthur Blackwood to his sole heir. Reference number is. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the document Patricia had prepared. SEC filing 30-24-09-18.001847. You can pull it up on Edgar right now. David's fingers were already moving across his phone screen. I watched his face as he found the filing, watched his expression shift from skepticism to surprise to something that looked like professional concern. It's legitimate, he said quietly. Looking at Julian, the filing is on record. Blackwood Family Trust transferred to Elena M. Chen as beneficial owner. Position shows 40% of outstanding shares. The silence that followed was extraordinary. I could hear the HVAC system, could hear traffic 42 floors below, could hear someone's watch ticking. A mechanical watch, probably expensive, probably vintage, The kind that announced you didn't need a smartwatch because you weren't that kind of person. Julian's hands were still gripping the presentation podium. His knuckles had gone from white to something close to bloodless. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't fully parse. Rage, certainly. Betrayal? Maybe. Though what exactly he felt betrayed by, I couldn't imagine, given that he'd fired me for being competent. And underneath it all, something that looked almost like fear. The fear of a man who'd spent his entire adult life operating under the assumption that he controlled his company absolutely, and had just discovered that his control was contingent, that someone else held enough power to challenge him, to block his decisions, to force his hand. That someone else was the assistant he'd fired 8 days ago. The geometry of it was beautiful. "How?" he said. The word came out rough, like his throat had forgotten how to form consonants. "How is this possible? Arthur Blackwood has been... his mental state. Arthur Blackwood has advanced dementia," I said. "He's in a memory care facility in Long Island, has been for 18 months, which is why his estate, including all assets held by the Blackwood Family Trust, has been transferred to his legal heir under the terms of his will. And that heir is you." Thomas Wright was looking at me with an expression I recognized from legal depositions I'd sat in on, the look of someone assembling facts into a timeline and not liking the picture that was emerging. "That heir is me," I confirmed. "Arthur Blackwood was my grandfather, my mother's father, Margaret Chen, née Blackwood. She died 11 months ago. I'm his only living descendant, which makes me the beneficial owner of all Blackwood assets, including his 40% position in Vance Global." Margaret CO was leaning back in her chair now, arms crossed, looking at me with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been calculation, or might have been both. "You were Julian's assistant," she said. "Not a question. A statement of fact that needed to be placed on the record. I was Julian's executive assistant for 3 years," I said, "until I was terminated 8 days ago. For..." I paused, let the pause do its work, organizational restructuring. I could see the board members processing this, see them starting to understand the timeline. Fired assistant discovers inheritance, becomes major shareholder, returns to the board meeting. The narrative was almost too perfect, too much like a revenge fantasy, which made it all the more satisfying that it was real. "Miss Chen." David Chen was using his lawyer voice now, careful, precise, every word chosen for maximum clarity and minimum liability. "Can you clarify the circumstances of your termination for the record?" "Of course," I said. "I was terminated 3 days after I corrected a critical error in the Hexagon Media merger documents, an error that would have resulted in Vance Global acquiring 5.1% of Hexagon instead of the intended 51% controlling position. The error was in section 12.4b, subsection 3. A decimal point placed 2 spaces to the left of its intended position." Thomas Wright's eyebrows had climbed toward his hairline. "A decimal point error in the Hexagon merger?" "Yes, I discovered it at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, coordinated with outside counsel to file an amended version with the SEC before the deadline, saved the acquisition. I looked directly at Julian and was fired 72 hours later for having seen the CEO make a mistake." "That's a deliberate mischaracterization," Julian started, but Thomas cut him off. "Was there or was there not a decimal point error in the Hexagon merger documents?" The CFO's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. The voice of someone who was responsible for the company's financial integrity and had just learned something that might compromise it. Julian's jaw worked. I could see him calculating, trying to find a spin that didn't make him look incompetent or dishonest or both. "The error was caught," he said finally, "and corrected. The merger proceeded as planned." "Caught by your assistant," Margaret said. "The assistant you fired." "Personnel decisions are not subject to board review," Julian said. His voice had recovered some of its authority, but the foundation was shaky. The termination was routine, standard restructuring. "Nothing about this seems routine," Thomas said. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the second set of documents, placed them on the conference table where everyone could see. "These are my emails to Cromwell and Associates at 12:07 a.m. requesting emergency correction of the Hexagon merger documents. This is Mitchell Vreeland's response confirming the error and thanking me for identifying it. These are the timestamps showing the original filing and the amended filing. And this, I placed a final document on the table, is my termination letter, dated 3 days later, citing organizational restructuring as the sole reason. David Chen reached for the documents, started reading. His expression shifted with each page. "Julian," he said quietly, "we need to discuss this, privately." "We're in the middle of a board meeting," Julian said, but his voice had lost its command. He sounded defensive, cornered. "Actually," I said, "I'd prefer we discuss it here, with the full board present, since I'm exercising my rights as a major shareholder to call for a formal motion." Every head turned toward me. "What motion?" Thomas asked. "I'm calling for an independent forensic audit of the Hexagon Media acquisition," I said, "including all strategic decisions made by the CEO's office in the 12 months preceding the acquisition, all communications with outside counsel, all internal assessments of risk, and all personnel decisions made in connection with individuals who had knowledge of the merger terms." The boardroom exploded into noise, not literally, but the careful corporate silence shattered. Board members turning to each other, voices rising, David Chen saying something about procedure, Margaret Seo looking at Julian with an expression that suggested every political calculation she'd been running had just gotten significantly more complex. Julian slammed his hand on the podium. The sound cut through the noise like a gunshot. "This is absurd," he said. "You can't just walk in here and demand—" "I can," I interrupted. "Section 5.7 of the corporate bylaws, any shareholder holding more than 10% can call for a special audit with the support of at least 2 board members. I hold 40%, which means I don't need anyone's support. But I suspect I'll get it anyway once the board understands the full scope of what I'm requesting." I pulled out another document. This one I'd prepared myself last night at 3 a.m., sitting in the Peninsula's business center with a laptop and Daniel Ward's complete archive of Blackwood corporate intelligence. "This is a preliminary analysis of Vance Global's acquisition strategy over the past 5 years," I said. "Specifically, it identifies 3 acquisitions, Hexagon included, where the purchase price exceeded fair market value by more than 30%. 3 acquisitions where the due diligence period was compressed to less than 45 days, despite the complexity of the targets. And 3 acquisitions where key financial disclosures were amended within 72 hours of the SEC filing deadline." I placed the document on the table and looked directly at Thomas Wright. "As CFO, you signed off on all of these transactions. I'm sure you performed appropriate due diligence, but I think the board would benefit from an independent review to ensure that all decisions were made in the best interest of shareholders and not rushed through for strategic reasons that might not align with fiduciary duty." Thomas's face had gone very still, the kind of still that meant his brain was working overtime, running through implications and exposure and liability. "These acquisitions were all properly vetted," he said carefully. "All followed standard procedure." "I'm sure they did," I said, "which is why an independent audit will confirm that and put everyone's mind at ease, unless there's a reason you'd prefer not to have an independent review." The trap was elegant. If Thomas agreed to the audit, it legitimized my concerns. If he resisted, it suggested he had something to hide. Either way, I'd introduced doubt into a room full of people whose job was to assess risk and liability. Margaret Seo was watching this exchange with the expression of someone who just realized she was watching a masterclass in corporate warfare. "I think Ms. Chen's motion has merit," she said, looking at Julian, not asking permission, stating a position. "Given her shareholder position and the questions she's raising, I think the board has a fiduciary duty to at least consider an independent review." "Seconded," said one of the institutional investor representatives, a man I didn't know well, but whose fund held approximately 3%. A man who just realized that voting with the 40% shareholder was probably better for his position than voting with the CEO, whose decisions were now under question. Julian looked like he'd been struck. His face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling into something close to purple. The carefully controlled CEO persona was cracking. Underneath it was rage and something that looked almost like panic. "This is a coordinated attack," he said. "This is..." She's been planning this. She found out about the Blackwood position and she's using it to exercise my shareholder rights, I suggested. Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. The same rights that you've been exercising with your 51% position for the past 7 years. The same rights that allow you to make unilateral decisions about company strategy. I'm simply asking for oversight, for accountability, for the kind of governance that protects all shareholders, not just the ones who happen to be CEO. David Chen was writing notes now. Legal notes, probably. The kind of notes that lawyers make when they realize a situation has gotten complex enough that documentation is going to matter. Julian, he said, I think we need to take a recess. We need to review Ms. Chen's position, verify her claims, and discuss the appropriate next steps with full legal counsel. The appropriate next step, I said, is a vote. I've called for an independent forensic audit of recent acquisitions. As a 40% shareholder, I have the right to call for that vote. Section 5.7 is clear. We can vote now or we can vote after a recess, but we're going to vote. Thomas Wright raised his hand. The gesture was enough to quiet the room. I agree with David that we need legal counsel before proceeding, he said. But I also agree with Ms. Chen that we can't simply ignore her motion. She has the shareholder position to demand a vote. He looked around the table. I propose a 30-minute recess. David, I want you to verify every claim Ms. Chen has made. Margaret, I want you to review the Hexagon acquisition timeline. Everyone else, stay available. We reconvene at... He checked his watch. 9:45 a.m. He stood. The signal was clear. The board meeting was suspended. Board members started gathering their materials, started standing, started moving toward the door with the kind of urgent purpose that suggested they all needed to make phone calls immediately. Julian remained at the podium, frozen, staring at me across 20 feet of conference table with an expression that contained multitudes of rage and confusion, and the dawning understanding that the woman he'd fired, the assistant he'd dismissed as disposable, had just walked into his boardroom and detonated a bomb under his carefully constructed authority. I closed my briefcase, picked it up, walked toward the door. As I passed Julian, I paused, turned, looked at him directly. You fired me for being right? I said quietly. Quietly enough that only he could hear. You fired me because I saw you make a mistake and you couldn't tolerate a witness to your fallibility. You threw me away like I was nothing. I let the silence hang for 3 seconds. I'm going to show you what nothing can do when it owns 40% of your company. Then I walked out of the boardroom and let the mahogany doors close behind me with a soft, expensive click. The hallway was quiet. Marcus and his security detail were still there, standing at a respectful distance. My replacement was at her desk, staring at me with an expression that mixed awe and fear in equal measure. I walked past them all, walked to the elevator bank, pressed the call button. The elevator arrived within seconds. I stepped inside, pressed L for lobby. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished brass interior. The woman looking back was smiling, not a large smile, not triumphant or cruel, just a small, cold smile that came from understanding that the first battle in a war had exactly according to plan. The elevator descended, and somewhere above me, in a boardroom on the 42nd floor, Julian Vance was beginning to understand what it meant to lose control. I didn't go back to the peninsula. Instead, I stood in the Vance Global lobby and made a phone call that would have been impossible 8 days ago and was now merely a formality. Patricia, I said when she answered on the second ring, I need office space. Today, at Vance Global. There was a pause. Not surprise. Patricia had probably anticipated this call the moment Daniel had told her about my shareholder position. Just the professional hesitation of someone calculating logistics. The executive floor, she asked. Yes, I want the corner office on the west side, the one that's currently listed as available for visiting executives. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear keys clicking. She was already pulling up building layouts, lease agreements, whatever documentation would be needed to make this happen. That office is 1,400 square feet, she said. It has interior access to the executive suite and a private entrance from the elevator bank. Julian's office is directly adjacent, sharing a wall. Perfect, I said. I'll have the paperwork drawn up within the hour. When would you like to take possession? I looked at my watch. The Cartier showed 9:23 a.m. The board was in recess until 9:45. 22 minutes until I needed to be back in that boardroom to watch them vote on my audit proposal. 22 minutes to establish territorial dominance on the executive floor. Now, I said, of course, I'll notify building management and have security provide access. Will you need furnishings? The office is currently equipped with standard pieces, but if you'd prefer... Standard is fine for now, I said. I'll upgrade later. Excellent. Check with the security desk. Marcus should have the keycard ready for you within 10 minutes. I ended the call and walked to the security desk where Marcus was already waiting. He looked like a man who'd had a very complicated morning and was still processing the implications. Miss Chen, he said, professional courtesy now. The respect you show to major shareholders. I have your executive access card. He held out a key card identical to the one I'd carried for 3 years as Julian's assistant, except this one had my name embossed on it in gold lettering. This will give you 24-hour access to the executive floor and your private office. Conference Room A, the executive lounge, and the parking garage level P1 for reserved parking. Reserved parking. I'd taken the subway to work for 3 years because parking in Midtown cost more per month than groceries. I took the card. Thank you, Marcus. Ma'am? He nodded. Then, quieter. For what it's worth, what you did up there, that took real courage. I looked at him. Saw something in his expression that might have been approval, or solidarity, or just the recognition of someone who'd watched corporate politics long enough to appreciate when the underdog actually won. It wasn't courage, I said. It was mathematics. The elevator ride to 42 felt different this time. I was alone in the car, no security escort, no board members watching. Just me and my reflection in the polished brass, and the ascending floor numbers marking my return to a space I'd left 30 minutes ago as a visitor and was returning to as an owner. The doors opened onto the executive floor, and I stepped out into territory that was legally mine now. 40% mine. Every fixture, every piece of furniture, every square foot of marble. I owned 40% of its value, 40% of its utility, 40% of its function. The mathematics of ownership were intoxicating. My replacement was still at what used to be my desk. She looked up as I exited the elevator, and I watched her face cycle through confusion again. I'd left the building. Why was I back? What was happening? I walked past her without explanation. Walked down the hallway toward the corner office Patricia had secured. The office with the private entrance and the shared wall with Julian's domain, and the 1,400 square feet that would serve as my base of operations. The door was already unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The office was everything Patricia had promised. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls, offering views of Manhattan to the west and south. Hardwood floors in a honey-colored oak that caught the morning light and turned it golden. A desk that was probably Herman Miller or Steelcase or one of those brands that charged $15,000 for engineered wood and ergonomic design, 2 guest chairs, a credenza, a conference table for 4, standard executive office layout. Nothing personalized, nothing that suggested anyone had actually worked here recently. It smelled like new construction and furniture polish and potential. I set my briefcase on the desk and walked to the windows, looked out at the city spread below. From 42 floors up, Manhattan looked like a game board, all those buildings and streets and people reduced to patterns, to geometry, to something you could analyze and understand and control if you had the right position. I had the right position now. Behind me, I heard footsteps in the doorway. I turned. David Chen stood there, the general counsel, looking uncertain in a way that attorneys usually tried very hard not to look. Miss Chen, he said, I've verified your shareholder position. Everything you said in the boardroom is accurate and legally sound. The Blackwood trust transfer is properly documented. Your 40% position is real. I know, I said. Yes, of course you do. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I also wanted to apologize for not recognizing your contributions when you worked here. You were an exceptional assistant, and I should have said that more often. I studied him, tried to determine if this was genuine or tactical, probably both. David was smart enough to know that major shareholders remembered who treated them well and who didn't. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. The board is reconvening in 18 minutes, he said. Thomas Wright has reviewed the documents you provided. He's recommending the board approve your audit proposal. This was the information I'd actually needed, the political temperature, the vote count. Julian's position, I asked. Julian is upset. He's arguing that your proposal is motivated by personal grievance rather than legitimate corporate governance concerns. But, David paused. Thomas controls the CFO's office and has significant influence with the institutional investors. If he supports your audit, you'll have the votes. And Margaret CO? Margaret is pragmatic. She'll vote with whoever she thinks is going to win. Right now, that appears to be you. I nodded. The coalition was forming. Not because anyone particularly liked me or cared about corporate governance, but because I held 40% and voting against me was politically dangerous. Power was its own argument. Thank you for the update, I said. David nodded and turned to leave. Paused in the doorway. Miss Chen, what you're doing, it's not personal, is it? This is about governance, about accountability. I looked at him. Let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. Does it matter? I asked. He considered this. I suppose it doesn't. From a legal perspective, your motivations are irrelevant. You have the shareholder rights regardless. Exactly, I said. He left. I turned back to the windows. 17 minutes until the board reconvened. 17 minutes to consolidate my position, to make sure everyone on that executive floor understood that the power structure had fundamentally changed. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia again. I need IT to set up my office systems immediately, I said. Full executive access, email, internal networks, shared drives, everything a board member would have access to. I'll have someone there within 10 minutes, she said. And Patricia? I need Daniel to pull every document in the Blackwood archives related to Gregory Vance, Julian's father, everything Arthur collected, every interaction, every business dealing. I want a complete file by end of business today. A pause. May I ask why? Due diligence, I said. If I'm going to own 40% of this company, I need to understand its complete history, including the parts that aren't in the official record. Understood. I'll have Daniel prioritize it. I ended the call and sat down in the executive chair behind the desk. It was perfectly adjusted. Someone in facilities management had probably set it to standard ergonomic settings. I spent 30 seconds adjusting it to my height, my arm length, my preferred lumbar support, making it mine. The IT technician arrived 9 minutes later, young, mid-20s, wearing a polo shirt with the Vance Global logo and an expression that suggested he'd been briefed that I was someone important, but wasn't entirely sure why. Miss Chen, I'm here to set up your systems. Thank you. I need full executive access, board-level clearance. He nodded and got to work. Connecting cables, logging into terminals. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, while I watched Manhattan perform its Monday morning choreography 42 floors below. All set, he said 15 minutes later. You're logged into the executive network. Email is active. You have access to the shared drives, the board portal, and all financial systems at board member clearance level. Is there anything else you need? That's all, thank you. He left. I turned to the computer and logged in with the credentials he'd created. The Vance Global network opened up in front of me. Folders, directories, files. The complete digital infrastructure of a Fortune 500 company now accessible at my fingertips. I navigated to the shared drives, found the directory for board materials, opened it. Inside, quarterly reports going back 7 years, strategic planning documents, acquisition analyses, everything the board reviewed and voted on, all neatly organized by fiscal year and meeting date. I opened the most recent folder, found the Hexagon Media acquisition materials, started reading. The preliminary analysis had been conducted by Thomas Wright's office. It showed Hexagon Media valued at approximately $280 million based on revenue multiples and market comparables. The recommendation was to acquire at no more than $300 million. Julian had paid $340 million, a 20% premium over even the generous internal valuation. I kept reading, found the due diligence summary. It had been compressed to 37 days, well below the 90-day standard for acquisitions of this complexity. The justification cited competitive pressure and market timing. I I opened my briefcase and pulled out the USB drive I'd brought, the one Daniel had given me containing preliminary Blackwood intelligence on Vance Global's recent acquisition history. I plugged it in and compared files. The pattern emerged immediately. 3 acquisitions in 18 months, all above fair market value, all with compressed due diligence periods, all finalized within 72 hours of SEC filing deadlines. It could be aggressive growth strategy, or it could be something else, something that would require a forensic audit to uncover. My phone buzzed, a text from Patricia, board reconvening in 5 minutes. Daniel says the Gregory Vance files will be ready by 6 p.m. tonight. I stood, straightened my suit jacket, picked up my briefcase, walked back to the boardroom to watch them vote to audit Julian's company, to watch them acknowledge, formally and on the record, that I had enough power to force accountability. The mahogany doors were already open. Board members were filtering back in, taking their seats, arranging their materials with the kind of studied casualness that suggested everyone had spent the recess making phone calls and running calculations. I walked to my seat at the far end of the table, set down my briefcase, remained standing. Julian was already there, at the head of the table. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 30 minutes. His face was drawn, his tie slightly loosened. The Creed Aventus scent was still there, but it smelled different now. Less like victory, more like desperation. Thomas Wright cleared his throat. The room quieted. "The board has reconvened," he said. "We have a motion on the floor from Ms. Chen calling for an independent forensic audit of recent acquisitions, specifically the Hexagon Media transaction. I've reviewed the preliminary documentation Ms. Chen provided. David has confirmed her shareholder status and her right to call for such a vote. The question before the board is whether to approve this audit." He paused, looked around the table. "I recommend approval," he said. "Given the concerns raised in Ms. Chen's significant shareholder position, I believe an independent review serves the interests of all shareholders and protects the board's fiduciary duty." Margaret Co. nodded. "I concur with Thomas's recommendation." One by one, the other board members voiced their positions. The institutional investors voted yes, protecting their own positions by aligning with the 40% shareholder. The private equity representatives voted yes, covering their liability exposure. 7 votes in favor, 1 abstention. David Chen, citing his role as general counsel and potential conflict of interest. And Julian, who didn't vote because the outcome was already decided. "The motion passes," Thomas said. "The board authorizes an independent forensic audit of the Hexagon Media acquisition and related strategic decisions. David, please engage a qualified auditing firm and provide the board with a timeline for completion." Julian stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the marble with a sound like violence. "This is a mistake," he said. His voice was tight, controlled rage barely contained. "You're allowing a personal vendetta to compromise this company's strategic position. You're giving power to someone who was fired for correcting your error," I said quietly, "for saving a $340 million acquisition, for being competent enough to see what you missed and professional enough to fix it." The boardroom went silent again. Julian looked at me with an expression that contained so much anger it was almost impressive. Almost, I could see the exact moment when he understood that this wasn't about the Hexagon merger. This wasn't about the audit, this was about power, and he just lost the ability to exercise his absolutely. "We're done here," Thomas said. Meeting adjourned. "David, please prepare the audit engagement letter. Everyone else will reconvene in 2 weeks for a regular quarterly review." The board members stood, started gathering their materials, started leaving. I remained seated, watched them file out, watched Julian stand at the head of the table, motionless, staring at nothing. When the room was empty except for the 2 of us, I stood, walked toward the door, paused next to Julian. "This is just the beginning," I said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "The audit, the oversight, the accountability. You fired me because I made you look fallible. I'm going to spend the next year making sure everyone knows exactly how fallible you are." I walked out of the boardroom and back to my new office. The Gregory Vance files arrived at 5:47 p.m. I'd spent the afternoon in my new office establishing presence, responding to emails with my new executive signature block, scheduling meetings with department heads. making it clear to everyone on the executive floor that I wasn't a visitor, wasn't temporary, wasn't going anywhere. Patricia had sent the files via secure courier, a messenger who'd required me to sign for a locked briefcase and provide identification before handing it over. Inside, a USB drive labeled Blackwood Archives, Vance, Gregory Arthur, 1951 to 2018. I locked my office door, closed the blinds on the interior windows that looked out onto the executive floor, sat down at my desk and plugged in the drive. The drive contained 847 files, organized by date and category: correspondence, financial records, legal documents, news clippings, photographs. Arthur Blackwood had been thorough, obsessive even. Every interaction with Gregory Vance documented, every business dealing recorded, every public appearance cataloged. I started with the earliest files, 2008, the year Arthur had begun acquiring his position in Vance Global. The company had been much smaller then, a regional consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring, revenue of approximately $40 million, 50 employees, privately held by the Vance family with Gregory as CEO. Arthur's notes were clinical. March 2008, initial meeting with GV. Company shows promise but capital constrained. GV seeking $15 million for expansion. Traditional lenders reluctant due to 2008 financial crisis. Opportunity for strategic investment at favorable terms. April 2008, due diligence complete. Company financials sound but GV's management style concerning. Aggressive, willing to cut corners. Risk tolerance higher than appropriate for firm of this size. May 2008, investment structured as convertible debt with option to acquire up to 40% equity position over 7-year period. GV agreed to terms, desperate for capital, did not fully understand implications of conversion rights. I kept reading. Watched Arthur slowly acquire his position, 5% in 2009, another 8% in 2010. By 2015, he'd reached 40%, all structured through shell companies that obscured his identity. But it was the 2012 folder that made me pause. Inside, a legal memorandum from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Confidential, Re-Ownership Dispute, Vance Global Incorporated." I opened it. To Arthur Blackwood, from Morrison & Pierce LLP, date June 18, 2012. Confidential investigation results, Vance Global origins. Per your request, we have completed our investigation into the founding and capitalization of Vance Global Incorporated. Our findings are as follows. 1. Corporate formation. Vance Global was incorporated in Delaware on March 15, 1994. Initial capitalization of $500,000. Listed founder majority shareholder, Gregory Arthur Vance. 2. Source of capital. Through forensic accounting and witness interviews, we have determined that the initial $500,000 in capital did not originate from Gregory Vance's personal assets or from any legitimate business loan. 3. Origin of funds. The capital appears to have originated from the liquidation of assets belonging to Blackwood Chen Development Corporation, a real estate development firm owned by Arthur Blackwood and Margaret Chen, now deceased. Specifically, $250,000 from the sale of commercial property in Queens, 127 Northern Boulevard, that was sold without proper authorization from all ownership parties. $150,000 from the withdrawal of operating capital from company accounts executed by Gregory Vance, who served as CFO of Blackwood Chen Development from 1991 to 1994. $100,000 from the diversion of client funds meant for a development project in Astoria. I stopped reading. Read it again. Let the implications settle. Gregory Vance, Julian's father, the man who'd supposedly built Vance Global from nothing, had stolen the founding capital from my grandfather's company. I kept reading. 4. Employment relationship. Gregory Vance was hired as CFO of Blackwood Chen Development in 1991. He had access to company accounts, client funds, and real estate assets. He used this access to systematically divert resources over a 3-year period. Number 5. Corporate theft. In March 1994, Gregory Vance resigned from Blackwood Chen Development and immediately incorporated Vance Global using the stolen capital. He severed all contact with Arthur Blackwood and Margaret Chen. 6. Margaret Chen's response. Margaret Chen, Arthur Blackwood's daughter and co-owner of Blackwood Chen Development, discovered the theft in late 1994. She attempted to pursue legal action but was dissuaded by Arthur Blackwood for reasons that remain unclear. The company was subsequently dissolved in 1995. 7. Arthur Blackwood's strategy. Rather than pursue criminal charges or civil litigation, Arthur Blackwood appears to have chosen a different approach: strategic investment in Vance Global beginning in 2008 when the company required capital and Gregory Vance was vulnerable. The next document was a handwritten note, Arthur's handwriting, shaky but legible. Gregory stole from us, stole from Margaret, used our money to build his empire while we struggled. I could have destroyed him in 1994, could have pressed charges, could have taken everything. But Margaret asked me not to. She'd been in love with him once, before she met her husband, before everything fell apart. She couldn't bear to see him prosecuted. So I waited, watched, built my own position. And when he needed capital in 2008, when the financial crisis made him desperate, I gave it to him. Not as charity, as investment, with terms that would eventually give me 40% of the company he built with my money. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice with compound interest. I sat back in my chair. Let the information reorganize everything I thought I knew. Julian Vance, the man who'd fired me, who'd built his identity on being a self-made billionaire, who'd inherited a company from his father and grown it into a Fortune 500 empire, was running a company that had been founded with stolen money. Vance Global's entire existence was built on corporate theft. And Arthur had known, had documented it, had chosen a slow revenge over immediate justice, had acquired 40% of a company that should have been partly his all along, and now that 40% was mine. I opened the next folder, found more documents, witness statements, financial records, a complete forensic trail showing exactly how Gregory Vance had stolen $500,000 and used it to build an empire. The final document in the folder was dated March 2018, 1 month before Gregory Vance had died. It was another handwritten note from Arthur. Gregory is dying. Cancer, months at most. I could tell him I know, could confront him with the evidence, could destroy his reputation in his final days. But Margaret is gone now too, and vengeance against a dying man serves no purpose. Instead, I'm leaving this for Margaret's daughter, for Elena. She doesn't know me. I pushed her mother away, pushed them both away because of pride and old wounds. But she deserves to know the truth, deserves to have what should have been her mother's. 40% of Vance Global, built with Blackwood money, returning to a Blackwood. Let her decide what to do with it. I read the note 3 times. My mother had never mentioned Gregory Vance, had never told me about Blackwood Chen development or the theft or any of it. Had she known? Had she chosen not to tell me? Or had Arthur kept it from her too, part of the same pride and old wounds that had kept them estranged? I'd never know. She was gone. Arthur was gone, at least mentally. Everyone who could answer these questions had disappeared into death or dementia, except Julian. Julian, who had no idea that his father's company, his legacy, his empire had been founded with stolen money. Julian, who'd fired me for being competent. Julian, who was about to discover that the 40% I owned wasn't just a strategic investment. It was restitution. I pulled out my phone, took photos of every document, uploaded them to a secure cloud storage account, made 3 backup copies on separate drives. Then I sat in my office as Manhattan turned from dusk to night and thought about what came next. The audit would proceed. It would find what I suspected it would find: overpayments, compressed timelines, decisions made without proper board oversight. It would be damaging but not fatal. Julian would survive it, might even learn from it. But this information about Gregory Vance, about the stolen money, about the real origin of Vance Global, this could destroy everything. I could release it, could leak it to the press, could watch Julian's reputation crumble as the business world discovered that his father had been a thief and his empire had been built on stolen capital. Or I could hold it, could keep it as insurance, as leverage, as the ultimate card to play if Julian ever tried to challenge my position or diminish my power. The choice was mine. 40% of the company, complete knowledge of its original sin. The power to destroy or the power to control. I looked out at Manhattan, at the lights beginning to glow in the buildings, at all those people in all those offices making their own calculations about power and money and revenge. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. "Did you receive the files?" I typed back, "Yes. We need to talk, tomorrow morning, your office." His response came immediately. 9 a.m., I'll have coffee ready. I stood, gathered the USB drive and locked it in my desk drawer, put on my trench coat, picked up my briefcase, walked out of my office and through the executive floor that was now 40% mine. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside, pressed L for lobby. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished brass. The woman looking back wasn't smiling anymore. She was calculating. This wasn't about getting even. Getting even was small, limited. A transaction that ended when the debt was paid. This was about something larger. Total domination, not just of Julian, not just of Vance Global, but of the entire narrative, the complete story of what this company was and what it would become. I owned 40% of a Fortune 500 company built on stolen money. And I was going to use that position to take everything. Not because I needed the money. I already had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Not because I wanted revenge. Revenge was what I'd accomplished this morning in the boardroom. This was about power, about showing Julian Vance and every other man like him what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. When you threw away someone who knew how to count, who knew how to calculate, who knew that mathematics, properly applied, could move mountains or destroy empires. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. I walked out into the Monday evening crowd and disappeared into Manhattan. Tomorrow, I would decide what to do with the information about Gregory Vance. Tonight, I would let Julian wonder what I knew. Let him imagine what came next. Let him understand, slowly and completely, that firing me had been the biggest mistake of his life.